There comes a moment in life when you realize that something has changed inside you, because suddenly you start to feel that an environment isn't as light as it seems, that a person isn't as sincere as they appear, or that something invisible is happening while everyone acts as if everything is normal. And even without understanding where it comes from, you know you're seeing something that nobody else sees. And that's precisely where the question that can change everything is born. Why am I the only one who notices this? Discernment never begins as a clear gift or a skill you understand immediately. In fact, it almost always starts as a discomfort, an unsettling perception, a feeling that the atmosphere of a room doesn't match the conversations, or that someone's tone doesn't match their words. It's something you feel before you can explain it. It's as if, without asking, your eyes are adjusted to a new light, a clarity that reveals things that were previously hidden, and suddenly the world, which once seemed simple, takes on a strange depth, as if there were layers that you can now see, but that others continue to ignore. The Bible speaks of moments like this. In 2 Kings 1, there's a famous episode where Elisha asks God to open the eyes of his servant, and when that happens, the text says that the servant saw that spiritual reality was much greater than what he naturally perceived. This story isn't there by chance. It shows that there are moments in life when God allows certain people to see beyond the surface, not so they feel special, but because something is happening that needs to be perceived, understood, and confronted. But what no one tells you is that this expanded vision doesn't always bring peace. On the contrary, it often brings unease. Seeing too much isn't always liberating. Sometimes it's disturbing. Because, while everyone around you lives on the surface, you perceive hidden tensions, silent intentions, subtle falsehoods, internal conflicts, heavy atmospheres. And this creates a kind of detachment that doesn't come from pride, but from awareness. It's as if you were on a different emotional and spiritual level, not superior, just more sensitive. Over time, you begin to notice that discernment puts you in the position of an involuntary observer. You don't choose to feel, you simply feel. You don't choose to perceive, you simply perceive. And this creates a kind of weight that is difficult to explain. Why am I feeling this? Why did only I notice this detail? Why did this smile bother me? Why did this conversation leave me with a strange feeling? Why is this environment, which everyone describes as light, making me tired? These questions mark the beginning of the first major difficulty faced by those who discern, the burden of perceiving too much. You don't know whether to speak, remain silent, interpret, or wait. You don't want to judge, but you also can't ignore what you're feeling. And when you try to act naturally, you realize that your mind is in one place and your spirit in another. That's when loneliness begins, not physical loneliness, but inner loneliness. It's the feeling of being surrounded by people, but at the same time being distant, as if you were looking at the world through a window that only you know exists. Gradually, you begin to recognize when an environment is not in harmony. You start to understand when someone is hiding something. You sense when there is an unspoken intention in the air. You identify when a person is being genuine or when they are playing a role. And this perception, although valuable, is not easy. It creates an inevitable emotional distance. Not a distance you want, but a distance that the truth imposes. This brings us to the second great challenge of discernment: invisible isolation. It's not that you want to distance yourself. It's not that you're tired of people. It's that people rarely understand what you perceive. Most live at the level of what is visible, but you are dealing with what is invisible. And this difference in depth creates disconnection. While others are talking about trivialities, you are perceiving internal tensions. While everyone is joking, you feel that something is wrong. While everyone is relaxing, you are trying to understand where this unease is coming from. Over time, you realize that your sensitivity has become a constant radar, a radar that works even when you don't want it to. And then a dilemma arises that accompanies almost everyone who possesses discernment. Should I speak or should I remain silent? If you speak, you risk seeming critical, exaggerated, or judgmental. If you remain silent, you feel you are betraying something within yourself, as if you were ignoring a warning that the Spirit placed in your heart. This dilemma is real, profound, and exhausting. There are times when you know you shouldn't say anything because people aren't ready to hear it. There are others when your silence weighs like a stone on your chest because you realize that avoiding the subject solves nothing. And while trying to balance this, you experience a form of emotional turmoil that few people imagine. It's the mixture of what you feel with what's around you. It's the impact that the atmosphere of the environment has on you. The truth is that many of the emotions you carry aren't your own. Many of the tensions you feel come from charged environments. Many sorrows that appear out of nowhere originate from the spiritual and emotional battles of others. And this capacity to absorb what doesn't belong to you, if not understood, transforms into exhaustion. Mental, emotional, and spiritual exhaustion. You wake up tired. You go to sleep tired. You feel weighed down by thoughts that didn't originate within you. And this is where one of the hardest lessons to learn emerges. Discernment is not the same as carrying burdens. There is a fundamental difference between perceiving something and becoming responsible for it. Many discerning people confuse sensitivity with obligation. They think that if they perceive a problem, they need to solve it. If they sense emotional pain in the environment, they believe they must heal it. If they identify a falsehood, they think they need to denounce it. But it's not always like that. Sometimes, discernment is simply that: perceiving, recognizing, and leaving it in God's hands. This confusion between perception and responsibility is what leads many people to burnout. They begin to live as if they were the emotional thermometer of everyone around them, trying to adjust what they feel in others, correct what is out of place, warn about what is hidden, and in the process, they lose their own lightness. Because the truth is this: you were called to discern, not to fix everything you perceive. There is a verse in Proverbs that says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it." This text is not only talking about protecting the heart from external influences, but also about not letting it become burdened with things that don't belong to it. Guarding the heart in this context means knowing how to filter what enters, discerning what stays, and releasing what is not yours to carry. But learning this takes time. In the beginning, you try to explain what you feel, and you are often misunderstood. You try to warn someone about a situation, and you are seen as pessimistic. You try to share a perception, and you are called too sensitive. And each of these experiences teaches you something important. Not everyone needs to validate what you see for it to be real. This is the third challenge of discernment: the need for validation. When you start noticing things that others don't, a natural temptation arises to want someone to confirm that you're not making it up, that you're not exaggerating, that you're not going crazy. You seek in others a security that, in reality, can only come from within. And while you depend on this external validation, you become vulnerable. Vulnerable to the opinions of others, vulnerable to rejection, vulnerable to constant self-doubt. Maturity and discernment begins when you learn to trust what you perceive, even without anyone's approval. Not arrogantly, but confidently. You understand that your perception doesn't need to be shared by everyone to be legitimate. You recognize that there are things only you see because God gave you eyes to see, and that is enough. This inner confidence changes everything, because when you no longer need others to validate what you feel, You stop living defensively. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to convince anyone. You don't need to justify your perceptions. You simply live with them, carry what you need to carry, share when necessary, and remain silent when wise. As time goes by, you also discover something liberating. Not everything you notice needs to be verbalized. There are insights that are just for you. There are perceptions that serve only to protect you, to warn you, to guide you. They are not pieces of information that need to be transformed into confrontation or conversation. They are internal signals that help you make better decisions, to position yourself more wisely, to choose your environments more carefully. This is especially true in relationships. When you discern that someone is not being sincere, it doesn't mean you need to expose that person. Sometimes, discernment simply serves to help you establish healthy boundaries, to avoid opening up too much, and to avoid creating expectations where there is no basis. You don't need to announce what you see. You simply act based on what you know. That is why discernment requires something fundamental: anchoring. Without roots, discernment becomes confusion. Without balance, it becomes paranoia. Without maturity, it becomes pride. And without identity, it becomes a prison. There are people who get lost within their own expanded vision, who become hard, defensive, distrustful of everything, as if the world were a constant threat. But that is not the purpose of discernment. That is merely the side effect when discernment does not find rest in God. Over time, you discover another risk: spiritual pride. Not the obvious kind of pride, but the kind that arises silently when you realize you see what others don't. It's not intentional. It's not malice. It's simply a consequence of perceiving more. But it's dangerous, because it makes you forget that you don't see more because you're more intelligent. You see more because God decided to reveal more. Discernment doesn't make you better. It makes you responsible. And then you arrive at the most important part of the journey: understanding who you are beyond what you see. Many build their identity on discernment. They become the person who feels, the person who perceives, the person who is suspicious. But that's not identity. That's function. Identity is not what you pick up from your environment. Identity is what God has called you to be. And when you separate these two things, everything changes. There is a profound difference between being defined by what you perceive and being guided by what you perceive. When you are defined by discernment, it becomes your prison. You live according to it, constantly reacting to what you feel, never at peace, always on alert. But when you are guided by discernment, it becomes your tool. You use what you perceive to make better decisions, but you don't let it consume your life. There is also something that needs to be said about the compassion that springs from mature discernment. When you are young on this journey, what you perceive irritates you. You see the falsehood and are bothered. You sense the inconsistency and distance yourself. You identify the manipulation and judge. But, with time, something changes. You begin to realize that behind every mask, there is a wound. Behind every falsehood, there is insecurity. Behind every manipulation, there is unresolved pain. And when you understand this, discernment ceases to be merely critical and becomes compassionate. You still see the truth, but not with judgment, but with empathy. You recognize that not everyone who acts inconsistently is a bad person. Often, they are simply wounded people trying to survive as best they can, and this change of perspective transforms discernment from a sword into a bridge. To live with discernment is to live with awareness. It's not about living in fear. It's not about living in distrust. It's not about living in worry. It's about living attentively. It's understanding that perceiving more doesn't make you a prisoner, but makes you conscious. It makes you lucid. It makes you awake. But awake in a way that doesn't steal your peace, but rather strengthens it. Ultimately, seeing what others don't see is a calling to maturity, responsibility, compassion, and balance. It's not an eternal burden. It's not a meaningless weight. It's an invitation to walk with more clarity, more care, and more depth. It's understanding that when God opens your eyes, He also opens a path that doesn't distance you from life but leads you to a life more conscious of what truly matters. And when you learn to walk with that awareness without letting it destroy you, discernment ceases to be a source of anxiety and becomes a compass. A compass that points not only to what is wrong, but also to where you should go, who you should be, and what you should prioritize.